Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast.
With Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. My guest comes from very far away, the north part of Norway, on a remote island with what he says a population of only 1,000 people. Sounds very interesting. His name is Torkil Færø, or Torkil Færø. He's an author, a general practitioner physician, an emergency physician, a documentary filmmaker, and a photographer. And we're going to talk about the Pulse Cure. It's a revolutionary new way to balance stress, optimize health, and live longer. So, Torkil, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Richard. It's a great podcast you have. You have some impressive guests. I'm honored to be here.
You may be my most remote guest of all, but very, very cool. A quick question. Why are you on this island, by the way? And then, we can get started on the other stuff.
Yeah, this is how I work. I work as doctor often in cities, but also in remote areas in Norway. I've been working all over Norway, and I particularly like the north, with the northern lights and the midnight sun and the nature. So I live in the city. I live in Oslo, the biggest city. So it's nice for me to have this, to come out into the nature and into the more remote rural areas of Norway. So it's charming places.
So tell me a bit about your background. What is the Pulse Cure and how did it come about in your life?
The Pulse Cure is a book I've written on how to use wearables to track our autonomic nervous system and our stress balance. And it has been on the best-selling list now in Norway for 68 weeks running. So here in Norway, it's been a huge success. So now it's being released in the US mid-May. So it's, the wearables like smartwatches, Garmin watches, Apple watches, Oura Ring. So there's the new technology that can track our heart rate variability, one of the most important metrics for our whole physiology and autonomic nervous system. So,
tell me about heart rate variability. I've heard a little bit about it, but, can you give a layman's explanation? And I want to ask you a few questions about it.
Yeah. So heart rate variability is the variations between heartbeats. And the heart doesn't beat at a very steady pace like a clock. It will, on the in-breath, if you're in a relaxed state, and breathe in, the heart will beat a little bit faster. And when you breathe out and there's a little less oxygen in the lungs, it will relax a little bit, just measured in milliseconds, but enough for the trackers to detect it. But if you are in a stress state, then it doesn't matter if you're breathing in or out. It will pump as steadily as a clock all the time, because it's kind of a signal to our old nervous system that our life and existence is in danger and you need all the forces now. You can't wait because you may not survive the next moment. So,
you want a degree of heart rate variability, but not too much or too little? Like, what's the sweet spot and why?
You want a balance. You want to be able to use all your forces, but you also need to recover from that hard work. So it's a balance that we are after. The good balance would probably be to be in a stressful mode maybe 20% of the time, and the rest to be in a relaxed mode. Even if you are working, when I'm working as a doctor here in the north, I'm totally relaxed. This is the most relaxing thing I do. So you don't need to be on the couch or sleeping, but you need to be in a restful state, you know. And there are so many stressors in our modern life that the stress-related diseases is really what's killing us, and it's what's making us sick, and it threatens our well-being. So it's regarded that 70 or 80% of the diseases that we treat today as doctors has some relation to stress in a broad sense. So it's very important. So it's what brings, you know, fatigue and burnout, and also the inflammation-based diseases that we see, and like heart disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and even cancer. So this stress that we're living under, it brings a lot of disease and unwellness.
So how is heart rate variability expressed in milliseconds, or what's the number of the units?
Yeah, milliseconds. Yeah. So
what would be a common low HRV versus a high one? What numbers would we hear?
A low heart rate variability would be, if you measure it in RMSSD, there are different kinds of scales. It would be maybe 30 to 40 milliseconds. That would be a good HRV, or a normal good HRV. But you can also have like 100 milliseconds. That would be like a very good HRV. But it's very important that you shouldn't compare your own HRV with other people. So we have our own baseline that's very individual and somewhat genetic also. But we can also, when we improve our lifestyle, and this is a good part, because what is healthy to do, like regarding sleep and nutrition and exercise and rest and alcohol and all this, it will show in your heart rate variability. So if you live in a more healthy way, you can see it. And that is what makes it more motivating, and it also makes it more easier to regulate your autonomic nervous system, your stress balance, when you can see it on your watches. It's like having a speedometer on your wrist that can show you your physiological speed, because we're not really equipped by nature to sense this. All our senses from evolutionary times have been directed outwards to threats from animals, from enemies, from food that is, you know, wasted and we should not eat. So all our senses outwards are very acute and good, so our eyesight, hearing, and smell, and so on. But the sense for our own state has not been prioritized. It has even been in the way. So if we had too much sense of all the stress that goes on inside us, it will disturb the senses towards the real threats from the outside. But now in our days, the inflammation that we get comes from our own stress levels, but we have no way of detecting it. So this is how these wearables can be like in our sixth sense, so to speak.
Okay, so tell me about the pulse cure. How did you discover this, and what is it about?
I was doing it mainly for my own sake. I learned from Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, that HRV was a very important metric. I had never heard of it until 5 years ago. And then by accident, I came across a device that could track it. That was an ECG device that I could put on my chest. And a couple of years after that, after I've been using that daily for like a couple of years, I realized that Garmin had this system built into their watches. And then I started using the watches, and for my own sake. And then my publisher, I've written a couple of books before. My publisher became aware that I was doing this and asked me if this was a book for them. So, and it's actually the world's, incredibly enough, it's the world's first guidebook on how to use wearables to track these lifestyle changes. So it still amazes me. And I've been on a podcast, on the Heart Rate Variability podcast just a month ago or so, and I asked him if there were any new books on the subject, and then it's actually the first one, which is strange because there's so many wearables around. Yeah.
So when the pulse, what's the delay between the heartbeat and the subsequent pulse? Are you essentially studying heart rate variability, but you're calling it pulse, or is pulse just an immediately accessible without a wearable, measure of heart rate variability? I mean, what?
You wouldn't be able to detect, if that's what you're asking, you wouldn't be able to detect these small, subtle changes without the trackers. So it's really a matter of looking at your watch and seeing the speed of your heart rate variability, so to speak. So Garmin, for example, will show you a stress level. So right now my stress level is 43, which is quite good. It goes from 0 to 100. So I can see my speed in the moment, and I can also see accumulated throughout the day, kind of a body battery, so I can see how much forces I have left to spare, for either a stressful event or some exercise, or should I go earlier to sleep tonight, and so on. So that is how I use the heart rate variability through the devices, which is kind of like dashboards for your own function, just like the dashboards in your car.
Right, but pulse is a very good proxy for heart rate variability, or it is heart rate variability. Is there any...
The heart rate variability is like watching your pulse with a magnifying glass. So it tells you much more than the pulse in itself. So it's, I would say, a more accurate measure, and it's more pointed towards the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So if you're in the relaxed state, in the parasympathetic state, that is when the pulse goes up on the in-breath and down on the out-breath. And in the sympathetic, stressful state that we're supposed to be in, parts of the day and be able to use all our forces, it's when it beats at a very steady pace, regardless of your breath. So the important thing is that it's the only way for us doctors to show the stress level of the patient. And the most important thing is that the patient has this speedometer themselves on the wrist. So it makes it so much easier both for doctors and the patients. And of course, the whole point is to avoid becoming a patient. So to become a CEO of your own health, because then you're in charge. But once you get sick, the doctor is in charge. So depending on your economy and the ability of your doctor to cure you, it's much better to avoid getting sick. Because these inflammation-based diseases that I'm talking about, they are avoidable. With a better lifestyle, we wouldn't need to have them.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Well, what is it about the pulse? You're saying you're looking with a magnifying glass, and you're looking at the actual waveform of the pulse, the intensity, the duration, also the variability. Is it solid? Is it, wiggly? Like, what factors are hidden within pulse when you look closer?
I haven't really looked into that, because the devices will tell you, like throughout the night, for example, one of the most important metrics is the heart rate variability measured throughout the night. So when I wake up, I can check my Oura ring, and it will tell me how ready am I for the day. And they will use different metrics and give me that number. So a couple of days ago, for example, I've been running a 10K race, and the day after that, it just said rest. You need to relax today, and even the day after. So this is how I use it, and this is how we all can use the wearables, because this is how artificial intelligence uses our own heart rate compared to like millions of other people's heart rate, and give you an estimate of what is your stress level in the moment, and how much forces do you have today? How much forces have you used today? How much should you relax or stress? Because if you have been stressing too little, then these devices will tell you, okay, today is a good day to go for a walk or do an exercise or to push some more, to do something fun.
After a stressful event, your heart rate variability will go down, and it tells you that rest.
It will go down. It will go down because you are stressed. So the heart rate variability will go down. Your heart rate will beat at a much more steady state because your body is working hard. It could be because of alcohol. That is the worst stressor, alcohol. So it could be because you have been exercising too much. It could be because you have a mental issue. You have trouble in your family. You have worries, financial worries, whatever. It could also be because you have been eating something late at night. And maybe something you don't tolerate very well. It could be some ultra-processed food. It could be gluten or something that you really don't tolerate. And then the watches will ask, what did you do last night? why was your heart rate lowered so late into the night? Because of course the watches, they don't know what is happening in your life. So you have to use the watch's artificial intelligence and couple with your own human intelligence to make out the totality of the picture of what is happening to you.
So besides telling you to rest or to be active, what else can it tell you? Like I've heard if you eat certain foods that are maybe not good for you personally, your pulse rate will go up or your heart rate will go up. You know, what things can people do? And what does it do to that heart rate variability?
Yeah, so once they get the message from the devices that there is a stressor, then you just have to find out, okay, what could it have been? Like for me, for example, chili is a very big stressor, much more than other people. So after a while, I understood that the common denominator of this stress was there was chili in the food. And once I could eliminate that, you know, I would have more forces to use the next day. I wouldn't be tired like if I've been drinking, you know, 3 whiskeys or whatever. So you have to do some detective work because it's just like a temperature. If I as a doctor get a patient now with a fever, that is just a sign that there's an infection in the system. And then I have to take a urine sample or I have to look in the throat and the ears and listen to the lungs and so on to find out where does this infection come from. And it's the same thing with HRV. So if you see that you have a bad HRV, then you have to do the detective work and find out, okay, what's the reason? And if you have a particularly good HRV, you have to find out that also, because that could be surprising things. For example, fasting makes for a better HRV. Cold, you know, cold exposure, cold plunges, cold showers. So most people will get some real big surprises when they start using them. And one of the biggest surprises for people is the effect of alcohol. So, you know, Whoop is one of the best ones, and also the Whoop podcast is very good. And Whoop says that 75% or so of their users will cut down on alcohol when they see the result. They don't need to be asked. When they see the effect of alcohol on the stress level, they reduce it. So this is how you use it.
How do you use what you call the pulse cure with patients, though? Like, how do you bridge the gap from what their wearables will say to a plan of action to help them?
Yeah, so more and more, at least in Norway, the wearables are very common. You know, I think 2/3 or more of the population uses a wearable or a smartwatch of some kind. So when I see that they do, and they have some issue related to stress, then I ask to see if I can see their phones, because it's usually easier to see on their phones. And then I get a window into their function that I don't have any other way of getting to know. So there's no lab test, no radiological test that can tell me about the stress level as easy as I can see on the smartwatches and their phones. And then I can demonstrate, okay, look here, you know, this day was hard, this day was easy, what did you do? And then I can explain to them. And of course, after the pulse cure, the HRV and using the smartwatches is becoming kind of a household concept in Norway. And it's, you know, they have done such a good job of making it easy to understand also for people. So you don't really need a doctor or to have a particular knowledge to understand this. So, and it's like a gamification of your own function. So people think it's fun. So it makes actually, you know, this good lifestyles that it makes it fun to do. So it's easier to do the hard thing when you see the results there and then.
Are people keeping like a stress diary or like outlier events with what was going on that day?
Yeah, actually, we have actually made a diary, a journal, where people can use their metrics and then write what they think about, you know, the night and the plans for the day and how the day has been. So they use the numbers they get from their devices coupled with their own experiences and feelings about their function. So it makes it easier to understand what's going on. Because it's so when I as a doctor ask my patients, you know, how have you been the last 2 months or 3 months? You know, they have our brains is not constructed that way that we can remember what happened and can tell it. So then it's a lot easier to have a health journal and to write down what has happened and to use the statistics to understand yourself better. So these devices, you know, provide an insight, a window into your own function that there's no other way to do it. And this is why it's now becoming so, you know, Samsung is coming with their Galaxy ring now. That is probably very close to the Aura ring. But I would say from the devices that I've tested, and I've tested quite a few, that the Garmin watches with their body battery system and their stress measurement in the moment, that is probably the most actionable and cheapest device also, because you would get it down to like $100 or maybe $120. So it's not an expensive thing to do.
Oh, so if people wanted to buy it, they should look up what heart rate variability Garmin watch, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think that the best thing would be to use a Garmin watch and use one of the Garmin watches with a heart rate variability, because the really cheapest ones that don't give the heart rate variability as a number, they still have the stress and the body battery system that is by far the most important part. But once you get up in the $300 segment, then you also get the heart rate variability over time. And then it's easy, for example, the menstrual cycle for women, it has such a huge impact on the stress levels. So the week before menstruation is not just a mood or a feeling or an irritation, with a PMS, premenstrual syndrome. It's a physiological load that is visible. And then it's so much easier to not do the hard training, to not put more stress on your body, because there is already been stressed. So, and that makes it so much easier to see and to manage your stress level, to regulate your stress level.
Yeah, but how do you instruct people? How do you regulate your stress level? If someone sees they have bad heart rate variability, that would stress them out too. Oh no, I need to fix this. So what can they do to help themselves?
Yeah, and that is why I wrote the Pulse Cure, because that includes all the strategies regarding sleep, regarding nutrition, regarding hydration, exercise, active rest, meditation, breathing exercises, cold exposure, how to relate to alcohol, and so on. So it's kind of a hands-on guidebook, and with also the experiences, we had 200 test people during the book, and their experiences also in the book, because we are very individual. Usually as doctors, we are thinking about the averages, but that doesn't really matter. The most important is how you react to a certain stressor, and this you will find out with the watches. So some people will find out that the most calming things they do is sing and play guitar, while for other people, that would be very stressful. Some people are stressed by knitting. Some people are relaxed by it. Some people are stressed by meditation. Some are relaxed. So here you'll find out how you react to a certain circumstance. Some people would be more disturbed by emotional factors, some less. Some will be more disturbed by alcohol and some less, So you'll find out how you work.
Okay. Well, very good. And you said the Pulse Cure is coming out mid-May. You have a specific release date?
Yeah, it's the 14th of May in the US. It's already out as an ebook and an audiobook, but the paperback version is out then in 14th of May. So it's less than a year and a half since it was first published in Norway. So it's been quite fast. So
what is some of the feedback you've gotten on the book? Some of the positive or unusual feedback that made you question the method.
Yeah, the feedback been overwhelming, because this book the way it has been sold is just from mouth to mouth, that people have been using it and seeing the effect and telling everybody about it. And the ones that have been particularly happy are the ones that have been on the verge of fatigue and, the burnout and so on, that has finally found a way to navigate and to get better. So they have been the most happiest. But this is useful for everybody. So this is why this book, as coming from like a dark horse, coming from out of nowhere, has been such a success, because it really makes it so much easier to control your levels, to avoid symptoms like migraine, brain fog, this tiredness that many people struggle with these days. And this is a daily, out of maybe 20 patients in my office, I'd say half of them would be in these states, and it would really be necessary to get their stress levels in order, and they would also function better, with a stress balance that is out of whack. It's hard to think clear. It's hard to make good decisions, even in business life or family life or whatever. You need to have your stress level in balance for your prefrontal cortex to work properly.
Okay. Makes sense. Well, very good, Torkil. So people can get the book, The Pulse Cure. They can also check out the Garmin watches that you said that, will track their heart rate variability. Any other resources for listeners that are interested in this subject?
Yeah, we have made a website, a social community. It's called thepulsecure.com, where you can see webinars. There are other groups there. It's kind of like Facebook, so you can post a question, you can show your curves or something that you have found, and then other people will be there to answer you and the questions. We have a blog there. We have different resources of doctors answering questions. And this is also the only place where you would get this information in this way. And I'm on Instagram also as Dr. Torkil, so it could also be interesting to see there. Yeah.
Well, very good. All right, Torkil. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me on.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.